The sheriff's notice was taped to the front door with blue painter's tape. Marcus Webb stood on the porch of the house he'd lived in for 11 years, the house where his daughters learned to ride bikes in the driveway, where he'd installed the kitchen backsplash himself, tile by tile, on a Saturday afternoon in 2014, and he read the paper 3 times before his brain would accept what it said. Foreclosure. Final notice. Vacate within 30 days. It was a Tuesday in March 2019. He was 45 years old, and in that moment, standing in 38-degree Ohio air in a work shirt he hadn't changed since Sunday, Marcus Webb understood that his entire adult life had quietly collapsed, and he had been the last one to know. To understand how Marcus got to that porch, you have to go back to 2007. He was 33, newly married to a woman named Diane, and freshly promoted to regional sales manager at a mid-size industrial equipment distributor in Columbus, Ohio. The salary was $74,000 a year, serious money to a kid who'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Akron. He bought the house in Westerville for $218,000, put 5% down, and told himself he'd pay it off early. He didn't. Instead, Marcus spent the next decade doing what a lot of Americans do when money feels stable. He expanded his life to fill it. A second car, a finished basement, 2 daughters in travel soccer. A home equity line of credit opened in 2011 to replace the roof, $22,000, that never quite got paid down before they pulled from it again for a new HVAC in 2013. By 2016, the home equity line sat at $38,400. The mortgage balance was still $161,000 because he'd refinanced twice. His credit cards, 3 of them, totaled $24,700. And his company had just been acquired by a private equity firm out of Atlanta that had very specific ideas about restructuring regional overhead. Marcus was laid off on a Wednesday afternoon in November 2016. They gave him a box, a handshake, and 8 weeks of severance. He told Diane it was a bump. He'd find something. He always had. The bump lasted 2.5 years. Not because Marcus wasn't trying. He sent 214 applications between December 2016 and June 2018. He kept a spreadsheet, obsessively color-coded, and landed 31 interviews. He got a final round 6 times. Each time, someone younger, cheaper, or with a more current software background edged him out. At 43, with a resume built entirely on in-person sales relationships and regional territory management, Marcus was discovering that the industry he'd given 20 years to had quietly automated around him. He took a job in February 2017 as a floor manager at a commercial supply warehouse. $19 an hour. He told himself it was temporary. He wore steel-toed boots to work and came home smelling like forklift exhaust and didn't tell anyone from his old life what he was doing. Meanwhile, the bills didn't pause. He started making minimum payments on the credit cards, then partial payments. He drained a $14,200 savings account by April 2017. He borrowed $8,000 from his father-in-law with a handshake promise to repay it by Christmas. He missed 2 mortgage payments in the fall of 2017, caught up with a payment plan, then missed 3 more in 2018 when the warehouse cut his hours. Diane left in September 2018. Not dramatically, not with a fight. She packed 2 suitcases on a Sunday while Marcus was at work and took the girls to her mother's house in Dayton. She left a note that said she loved him and she couldn't watch this anymore. Marcus sat in the kitchen for 4 hours that night without turning on a light. By the time the foreclosure notice arrived in March 2019, here was the full picture. $161,000 remaining on the mortgage in default. $38,400 on the HELOC. $31,200 in credit card debt, now in collections. $8,000 owed to his father-in-law. Total, $238,600 in debt, on a warehouse salary that grossed $36,000 a year. His net worth was negative $201,000. He was 45 years old. He had a 2009 Honda Accord with 144,000 miles on it, a storage unit full of furniture he was paying $89 a month to keep, and a studio apartment he'd rented in a hurry for $675 a month that smelled like someone else's cooking. There was a Tuesday night in April 2019, 3 weeks after the foreclosure notice, where Marcus sat on the edge of a bare mattress, eating cold rice from a takeout container, and genuinely could not name one reason the next morning would be different from that one. That was the bottom. He didn't find a mentor. Nobody showed up with a system. What happened was smaller than that, and more honest. His older daughter, Kayla, was 14. She called him on a Thursday night, and somewhere in the middle of a conversation about her science project, she asked, completely offhand, "Dad, are you going to be okay?" Not accusing, not angry, just a 14-year-old girl asking her father a direct question because she was old enough to know something was wrong and young enough to still believe he could fix it. Marcus said yes. And then, for the first time in 2 years, he had to figure out if he meant it. He started with a legal pad and a pen. Not a budgeting app, not a financial advisor, just a yellow legal pad where he wrote down every single number, every debt, every dollar coming in, every dollar going out. He'd been avoiding that exercise for almost 3 years because he was terrified of what the total would be. When he finally added it up, $238,600, he felt something unexpected, clarity. The monster was real. It had a size. It could be fought. He found a nonprofit credit counseling agency, Appraisal Financial Counseling, through an internet search at the Columbus Public Library. His first appointment was free. The counselor, a woman named Rita Okafor, sat across from him with his numbers and didn't flinch. She helped him negotiate his credit card debt into a 5-year debt management plan at reduced interest rates, $538 a month total across all 3 cards. He called the Helix servicer himself and negotiated a hardship forbearance. Bought himself 8 months. Then he did something that took more courage than any of it. He called his old regional director, a man named Phil Serrano who'd been moved to a consulting role after the acquisition, and asked if there was anything, any contract work, any project, any need for someone who knew the industrial distribution market inside and out. Phil said, "Call me back in 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, Phil had a 6-month contract with a manufacturer in Mansfield that needed someone to rebuild a sales territory from scratch. $58,000 for the 6 months. Marcus took it. He moved out of the studio. He didn't move somewhere nicer. He moved into his cousin's spare room in Gahanna and paid $400 a month. He drove the 2009 Accord with 144,000 miles on it. He brought lunch every single day. He paid $1,200 a month toward debt and invested $200 a month into a Roth IRA. Not because $200 felt meaningful, but because Rita had told him that starting was the only thing that mattered. The contract turned into a permanent position. Salary, $81,000. Then a raise in year 2, $89,500. Diane didn't come back, but they found a quiet, respectful rhythm as co-parents. Marcus was present for his daughters in ways he hadn't been when he was performing the role of successful provider. That mattered. Marcus Webb turned 50 in November 2023. By that birthday, the credit card debt was gone. Paid off in full in January 2022, for months ahead of schedule. The Helix had been settled for $27,000 in 2021. He negotiated a lump sum payoff with the servicer when the forbearance ended and the market shifted in his favor. He repaid his father-in-law $8,000 plus $1,200 in interest that nobody had asked for. His Roth IRA, started with $200 a month in 2020, was worth $41,000. His company 401k, which he'd maxed at $23,000 in 2023 under the catch-up contribution limit, had a balance of $68,000. He had $27,000 in a high-yield savings account. He'd purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in Canal Winchester in 2022 for $239,000, putting 20% down. Home equity at current market value, roughly $364,000 against a $191,200 remaining mortgage. Total net worth at 50, approximately $509,000. 4 years from negative $201,000 to positive $509,000. A swing of $710,000, not from a windfall, not from crypto, not from luck. From a legal pad, a credit counselor named Rita, a phone call to Phil Serrano, and a question from a 14-year-old girl who just wanted to know if her dad was going to be okay. On the morning of his 50th birthday, Marcus made coffee and stood at the kitchen window of a house that was his. His daughters were coming for dinner. Kayla was 19 now, studying business in Athens, Ohio. She called to say she was bringing cake. He stood there with the mug warm in his hands and thought about the man who had sat on a bare mattress eating cold rice in the dark. And he didn't feel distant from him. He felt grateful for him. That man had stayed. That man had picked up a legal pad. If you've ever felt like the numbers were too big to face, like looking directly at the damage would make it more real, Marcus's story says otherwise. The damage was already real. What the legal pad gave him wasn't information. It was permission to start. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Debt-Free Stories. Every week, we bring you one real account of someone who hit the wall and found a way through. Leave a comment below. What's the hardest financial truth you've had to write down? We'll see you in the next one.